Good day to you. Hope you're having a wonderful day. We've been reading in the book of Deuteronomy. Last time we read Deuteronomy chapter 22, which had various different moral laws. And now we want to read Deuteronomy chapter 23. And this is going to be about people who are excluded from the assembly. Now remember, this is people being excluded from the assembly way back in the old law. This is back when the nation of Israel was just being established. So we want to remember the timing and the context of these things. It's different from today. We don't exclude people like this today, but there was reasons, and God mentioned some of these reasons even back then. So this is Deuteronomy chapter 23, and I am reading from the Amplified Bible. He who has been castrated by having his testicles crushed or his male organ cut off shall not enter the congregation of the Lord. A person of illegitimate birth shall not enter the assembly of the Lord, none of his descendants, even to the 10th generation. An Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter the assembly of the Lord, none of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall ever enter the assembly of the Lord, because they did not meet you with bread, food, and water on the road as you came out of Egypt, and because they hired to act against you Balaam the son of Beor from Pethor of Mesopotamia to curse you. Nevertheless, the Lord your God was not willing to listen to Balaam, but the Lord your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord your God has loved you. You shall never seek their peace nor their prosperity all your days. So I want to mention just a couple of little things here. I'm talking about he who has been castrated or had his male organ cut off. I think this is, to me, I'm relating this to current day, and maybe that's partially a mistake, but I don't think it is. I think this comes down through time to us. And I think we look at this and, God doesn't want us maiming ourselves, right? He doesn't really want us being maimed or injured in this way anyway. There's no good reason that we would, be maimed in such a way. But, just looking at that and thinking about modern day, this does give us an idea of God wanting us to be happy with the body that we've been given, be content with what we have, and not injuring ourselves, right? Because, when you're injured like that, when you're basically making yourself less than what God made you as. You're basically removing a part of you. And I would relate this to both male and female, honestly, in that if you're removing things and having things done, and I'm speaking mainly of unnecessary surgeries, or you're trying to add things, you're hurting yourself in some way. Now, I'm not talking about where you need a surgery, like you have, you need a gallbladder removed or appendix removed or something that's threatening your life. That's another story. That's totally different. But I'm just looking at realistic surgeries or operations or procedures that one might need. Now, when they mention in verse 2 illegitimate births, there is a list of things given in this Bible, and it's talking about them. It says illegitimate birth, so it says one who is born from incest or an adulterous relationship. And you could say one that was born adulterous. It could also be, what's the word? Like premarital sex. So it's not truly, it kind of is adulterous if you think about it, because even though you're not committed to anybody, you're having sex out of wedlock. So it's still kind of adulterous. And then they do mention the idea of a mixed marriage, a Jew or a Jew with a Gentile. Now, the only thing is, I don't think that is actually what's meant here. that last one, a Jew with a Gentile, because we do have cases, and we see this down through time, that the Jews and the Gentiles do intermix, and there was a process by which a Gentile could become a Jew. So I don't think that was really what was intended here, even though they list it here in this Bible. I do think the other things about incest and adulterous or premarital sex, I do think those are correct. I do think those are what more like what was intended. Okay. All right. So if we look at verse 3, there it lists the Ammonite and the Moabites, and God gives his reasons for that. Because they did not bring bread out to you, and they hired Balaam against you. So that makes sense. God is going to be against those who were against his people. So, all right, let's move on with the rest of the chapter. You shall not detest an Edomite, for he is your brother, Esau's descendant. You shall not detest an Egyptian, because you were a stranger, resident alien, foreigner in his land. Their children of the third generation who are born to them may enter the assembly of the Lord. When you go out as an army to fight against your enemies, you shall keep yourselves from every evil thing. If there is any man among you who is ceremonially, I may have put too many syllables in that, ceremonially unclean because of nocturnal emission, then he must go outside the camp. He shall not come back to the camp. But when evening comes, he shall bathe in water, and at sundown he may return to the camp. You shall also have a place outside the camp to which you may go, and you shall have a spade among your tools, and when you prepare to sit down outside to relieve yourself, you shall dig a hole with it, and shall turn and cover up your waist. Since the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp to rescue you and to defeat your enemies before you, therefore your camp must be wholly undefiled, and he must not see anything indecent among you, or he will turn away from you. Now, if you think about this, this has a lot of repercussions. Now, one, we see people who go camping and hiking, and they still follow this practice today. Why? Because it is a good, more clean, more sanitary practice. If you're camping, if you're out in the wild and you need to use the bathroom, you cover your waist so that, others are not going to be defiled or because really our waste is just that. It's not a clean thing. It's not a good thing. In the centuries past, in a lot of towns and cities, they would just dump their waste out in the streets. And these cities and towns, a lot of people became very sick from these awful practices, not to mention the stench and other things. This would, of course, be horrible, but it would cause, or at least allow, and maybe even promote certain sicknesses because of the waste being there that would attract certain things that you don't want. It would attract a lot of, anyway, it's unclean. Like he says, it's unclean, and I'm thinking of unsanitary is what I'm thinking. It's all unsanitary, and it promotes that kind of illness that you get from not having a clean or sanitary environment. So not only is God offended by it, he says, he must not see anything indecent. But if you think about it, this law, this rule would keep them more sanitary, would keep them away from more disease and sickness. It would help keep them safe. Again, all of God's rules and commandments, even in the Old Testament back in the law, they made a certain sense. There was a certain logic to them. Even if we don't always understand that, there is a reason. So here again, he's given them a good reason to keep their camp and later their towns and cities clean. Keep them clean, right? Keep them sanitary. Because if you live in a more sanitary environment, you will have less sickness and less disease. You shall not hand over to his master a slave who has escaped from his master to you. He shall live among you in the place he chooses in one of your cities where it pleases him. You shall not mistreat or oppress him. Now this is a clear statement from God. He's not impressed with slavery. He does not promote slavery. I've heard some people say that the Bible promotes slavery, that everyone would still be enslaved if we follow the Bible. That's the furthest thing from the truth. The Bible acknowledges God and the Lord and the writers in the New Testament. They acknowledge that slavery did happen. Okay, they acknowledge that it was a real thing, and that people of it had nothing to do with your skin tone back then. Back then, anybody could be enslaved. You could be defeated by another tribe or nation and be enslaved. There's all number of ways you could be enslaved. Some of that enslavement was just as bad as anything we ever saw, say, in the South in the U.S., and some of it was not. Some of it was, I hate to say better, but it was better. Some of it, the conditions of it were better. Under the Roman rule, I'm not going to say always, but a lot of times a slave could work and earn their freedom or pay for their freedom, just like they could buy themselves Roman citizenship if they were in a country that was conquered and they weren't born in Rome or born in the Roman Empire. They could buy or purchase citizenship. And the same for a slave. A lot of times they had a method to work through that. Now, not always, and not every slave was treated the same. I'm saying there are differences, just like we see in the world today. Some people are treated differently than others, and I'm not talking about skin tone or anything like that. Again, I'm just saying it's just happenstance. Different people are different, and some people will treat others kinder and nicer and better, and others will not. So here God is telling them, if a slave has escaped his master, you do not return that slave. You allow them to live where they want to live, and you don't mistreat or oppress them. So you're like a sanctuary for an escaped slave. And you'll notice the first part of the U.S. to really follow that was the North. Now, the North did have slaves. Some people say they never had slaves. That's not true. But they were the first to abolish it, and they were the first to become a safe haven for slaves, for runaways. And I believe these verses probably contributed to that. There shall be no cult prostitute among the daughters of Israel, nor shall there be a cult prostitute, a sodomite, among the sons of Israel. You shall not bring the wages of a prostitute or the price of a dog, that is a male prostitute, into the house of the Lord your God as payment for any vow. For both of these, the gift and the giver, are utterly repulsive to the Lord your God. Now, these are prostitutes. Whether it be male or female doesn't even matter. And whether it be a homosexual prostitute or not, I don't think that matters. The problem is they're prostitutes. They're prostituting themselves, and they're selling themselves in this sexual way. And God, as he says, it's utterly repulsive to him. Both, now notice the gift and the giver. So even the person that is, even though they're bringing that money to the Lord, God doesn't want it, and he's repulsed by that person. Now, someone who comes out of that situation and gets forgiveness, and I'm going to talk especially about now, someone who comes out of that situation and gets forgiveness, God, of course, loves them. He loves them in that situation. He just wants them to come out. The situation is utterly repulsive, the fact that someone would be prostituting themselves in such a way. And that's not a good, godly thing, and we know it's not. We know that morally that is a bad or reprehensible thing, right? You shall not charge interest to your fellow Israelite interest on money, food, or anything that may be loaned for interest. You may charge interest to a foreigner, but to your fellow Israelite you shall not charge interest, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all that you undertake in the land which you are about to enter to possess. Now this is interesting. You shall not charge interest to your fellow Israelite. So that means money, food, or anything that can be loaned, right? So that meant when you loaned to your neighbor, to your brother, you weren't charging them. Now he does make an exception that you can charge a foreigner. But now here he's saying a foreigner, not necessarily the same thing as a stranger in your land who you should treat as a fellow Israelite, because he says that in the previous, I think that was in the previous chapter where we read that you shall treat the stranger in your land as one of you, as one of the people in your land. Now, if I'm confusing this with something else I've read lately, I apologize, but I know that God does say that you should treat the stranger in your land the same as your fellow countryman, your fellow brother. So, but here he's saying a foreigner you can charge interest to, and a foreigner would be someone who's outside of your land, right? So that kind of makes sense. At least, God has his reasons and has the thing is, we don't want to be harming our fellow countrymen, right? We want to be helping each other, and that means loaning them something, with the idea that they will give it back, Now, not charging interest, that means on anything that you give, that you loan them, you wouldn't. Now, going to a Christian aesthetic, really, going forward, let's roll forward to what Jesus says. He says to lend, expecting nothing in return. And he doesn't make it just your countryman. He doesn't make it just the stranger. He doesn't make it just the foreigner. He makes it everybody, your neighbor, whoever your neighbor is, everyone. You should lend, expecting nothing in return. Now that means your business is not going to be banking, right? I'm just going to say that's just the way it is. But you lend expecting nothing in return. So we're really talking more personal, but it makes me question the idea of banking sometimes. I think banks could work in different ways and still make money without charging interest. And we know that credit cards and banks right now tend to really be outlandish with their interest. It's what we used to call usury, and we used to have laws against that. But they've been gone for a long time, and that allows them to charge exorbitant interest. I would recommend that you stay away from credit as much as you possibly can. Only take on a little bit of credit, debt, if you really, really have to, like your house and maybe your car, and just say no to the rest of it, All right. So enough about that. That's just a recommendation. I think that would help you with your finances if you're having struggles and you have too much credit card debt and things like that. That will wreck your life, and it will take you years to pay your way out. I know because I did that. I did that when I was younger, and I can tell you it is a horrible thing to go through. So I just recommend that you stay away from debt as much as possible. Do you really need that so bad that you need to go in debt for it or put it on a credit card? Because the minute you put it on a credit card, I don't care if you got it for half price, unless you pay it off immediately, that interest is going to make that thing end up costing you like 3 or 4 times what you should have paid for it. So just saying, that's math. Now, math is something I'm good at, and we could take some different examples, but that's just a fact. I saw that everything that was being bought through credit was ending up costing me, because I wasn't able to pay it off quick enough. It was costing me 3 and 4 times what the actual value of the product was. So I was way overpaying for everything I bought because I used credit. Okay. So it's just a fact. Stay away from that as much as you can. When you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay to pay it, for he will most certainly require it of you, and a delay would cause you to sin. But if you refrain from making a vow, that would not be counted as sin to you. Oh, sorry, I misread that. But if you refrain from making a vow, that would not be counted as sin in you. You shall be careful to perform that vow which passes your lips, just as you have made a voluntary vow to the Lord your God, just as you have promised with your own words, mouth. Now, I'm going to roll us forward again. Jesus warned us about vows. Don't make vows. Don't make promises. Don't swear on this or that. Just say yes or no. Just speak what you're going to do and do it. Say what you mean what you say. Now that's what a teacher told me in the past, and she was right. Say what you mean what you say, be honest, have integrity. Don't make these weird vows and don't do vows like this, because he's warning you, if you make a vow to him, he's going to hold you to it. But he says if you don't make a vow, then it will not be counted as sin. Like, when you say you're going to do something and you intend to do it you fully intend to do it with your whole heart, but something out of your control prevents you, well, that's a normal course of this life. That happens sometimes. So that would not be held against you. However, if you make a vow and a promise and you swear on all that's holy, and I'm just making stuff up as I go, so bear with me. But then you're making a big deal out of it, and you're making a big production out of it, and and then if you don't keep it, then that is sin, right? But, if we agree to do something together and then something comes up that I couldn't prevent and I can't do it, then, that's not a sin. That's circumstances. Things happen. When you enter your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes, as many as you please, but you shall not put any in your basket to take with you. So this is a different idea, and I can give you a modern day example. Well, it's kind of modern if you count 50 years ago when I was a kid, or maybe 40, but no, probably 50. Anyway, like, we had neighbors who had they had a whole bunch of apple trees. I don't know if it was enough to call it an orchard, but it was a lot. Okay. It was like 5 or 6, half a dozen, maybe more. And they didn't mind at all if we, plucked an apple and ate it, and just like he's talking about here, he's saying if you go in the neighbor's vineyard and he's using grapes as the example, and you want to eat some grapes, that's okay. And your neighbor shouldn't mind, right? But if you go over there with the intent to just rob your neighbor blind and fill up a bag or a basket and just take all their stuff, well, that's kind of rude, right? Even for my neighbor who was not making a living off these apples at all, but I know that they did sometimes, they would pick some apples and they would make some pies and different things that they like to do with those apples. They were decent apples. But it would have been wrong of us to go over there and just harvest all their apples, and take them back home with us, So there's a difference in just, having a few, and your neighbor doesn't mind that. And matter of fact, in the law, God tells them to allow for this type of thing, so that if somebody wanders into their field or their whatever and they have a little bit of food, it's not a big deal. If the needy and the poor, come by and get some of the stuff that you've left behind, that's supposed to be for them, that's okay. So, but there's a difference in that and purposeful coming in and basically stealing, right? So that's what that's about, to keep you from coming over to your neighbor's garden. And you got to remember, they were very agriculturally centered back then. But to come over to your neighbor's garden and just steal all his harvest, that would be wrong, right? So I think that's easy to understand. When you come into the standing grain of your neighbor, you may pluck the ears of grain with your hand, but you shall not wield a sickle in your neighbor's standing grain to harvest it. Now, again, same as with the grapes, it makes sense. You remember the disciples with Jesus, they plucked some heads of grain and ate it, and the Pharisees were all upset, but that's beside the point. The fact is, that was That was a practice. That was a common practice. It wasn't a big deal if you did that. People traveled a lot back then. Back then, you didn't have a way like now we have coolers and vehicles and all these ways to bring supplies with us. Back then, that wasn't as easily done. So you might need to rely on the kindness of someone's field and being able to pluck a little bit of something and eat it on your way. Not taking all their harvest, but just, having a little bit for yourself. There's a lot of things about this that make sense if you think about it and give it a moment, realize their situation was very different from ours today. But I would think to some degree some of this could still apply, though. I don't know if I had a watermelon garden, if I would want people coming in and taking my watermelons, though, because you only get like one good watermelon maybe out of a vine. Pumpkins, too, for that matter. But sometimes you may get more than that, but I'm just thinking of odd situations, I guess. Nonetheless, these were various different rules and laws and things to think about. And God here is telling them these things really for their own good. If we back up and look at, like, the prostitution, we know that is a bad practice. It leads to a lot of bad things. Again, these rules are to help them to make things better for them. Not returning the slave, again, that's to improve someone's life. That's to help them and not to make things worse for them. Not charging interest within your group, within your community, within your people. That helps your people and your community. It makes your community stronger and better. So there's reasons for these things to help people. God's will and His laws and rules are always to be helpful. We may not always understand it because we're thousands of years removed from their daily life, and so sometimes it's hard for us to imagine that. But I just want to mention that God's law, even back then, was to help them and for their betterment. And then the law that Jesus gave us in the Gospels, really, again, it's an even better version of the law, and again, it is for our good to help us. It's not intended to be an onerous or awful thing, but it's supposed to be a good thing. So I want to thank you for listening. Hope you have a wonderful day. May God bless you and keep you safe. And remember, God loves you.